The fighting shotgun. The shotgun for use in a martial context. Offensive, defensive. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Welcome to this podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way with Almighty God at the center, biblical Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am blessed to serve you as host, military, law enforcement, private security, contracting, competition shooting, hunting, background, bio bullet points in the show notes. As you might imagine with that background, I have a bit of experience with the shotgun. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. With that, I've often said that the shotgun is the most versatile firearm that we can own. I've often said, if it was the peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan, the apocalypse, and you gave me no caveats and said you could have one long gun, it's going to be a shotgun. If you give me a bunch of caveats, it'll be something else, right? If it's a battlefield scenario, if you make it Red Dawn, I'm going to pick a battle rifle. But if you just say no other information, the apocalypse is upon us, you must grab a long gun, it's going to be a shotgun. Why? Because it's the most versatile tool. I can take anything from a small bird to a bear. I've taken both those things with a shotgun. It's phenomenal for defense or offense with the focus of today's episodes. It is a super versatile firearm. But today we're going to zoom in and focus mostly on the fighting aspect of shotguns. They are phenomenally effective for fighting, the shotgun. They don't get a lot of love compared to a lot of other things. There's a few reasons for that, I think. One, they're not as cool looking on Instagram, which sadly I get. I don't have TV or social media or that stuff, but sadly I think that's a big push on what people buy, is what is getting pushed on social media. So that's actually not even relevant to me, and it shouldn't be relevant to you, but that is a big reason I think they're not talked about as much. Another one is a lot of people nowadays, they get their firearms training from the military. And it used to be, in days of yore, you would expect the average man joining the military to already be pretty familiar with firearms and realize there's a whole world of firearms, and then this is the one you use in the military. But a lot of times today, because we've become so urbanized, and I would say many men have become feminized and not, studying the martial aspects or putting food on the table for themselves, perhaps the only firearms exposure they ever get is in the military. So, and then people look to them for advice, and they have good advice on the arms they use in the military, but a lot of the military, unless it's a specialty role, does not use a shotgun for good reason. Again, I said on a battlefield, you want a battle rifle. So I think the shotgun is neglected for that. Also, if I'm being honest, as much as I love the shotgun, it's not as much fun to shoot defensive loads to a shotgun for an afternoon. I really enjoy going out and shooting a 22. I like shooting an AR. I like shooting a 308. I'll give a broad generality to prove a point here. When I was doing some specialized stuff in law enforcement, I had access to all kinds of cool guns. I'm talking full auto, like actual assault rifles, right? Like a full auto Car 15 or M16s or, submachine guns. I had access to all that stuff. But oftentimes, if I was going to do something serious, I would elect to, and I was, doing like range master duty. I could just go into the Army and grab whatever I wanted. But I would grab a Remington 870 with buckshot and slugs, with proper sights, properly set up. Why? Because I wanted to stay alive. And the tool that was going to help me stay alive when somebody was trying to kill me in that environment was a fighting shotgun. Period. I took it over a Mini 14. I took it over an AR-15. I took it over, a submachine gun, because I didn't care what looked cool. I didn't care what was, what was, Instagrammy. That wasn't even a thing, right? Just I cared what was going to keep me alive and accomplish the mission, catch the bad guy, right? I worked fugitive recovery. I did some other specialized stuff, and the 12 gauge, a fighting shotgun, is phenomenal for that. It's super effective inside its parameters. Now, it's not all that I would take. There are missions where I would take other things. There are missions where I would take a rifle because a rifle made more sense. But the shotgun is amazingly effective in its parameters. And what are those parameters? Well, you are going to generally give up some range compared to most rifles. Maybe not compared to like a 45-70, but compared to most modern rifles, you're going to limit yourself. I don't think as much as people like to believe. If you actually put the work in and, sight in your shotgun with proper sights. We'll get into proper setup hopefully later, God willing, in this episode. But you get your shotgun set up appropriately, even with a smooth bore shotgun with pretty conventional slugs, 125, 150 yards is not out of the question for an effective range. In most environments, for most people, especially in anything you're going to be able to justify using a fighting shotgun for, 150 yards, a football field and a half, is a quite a poke for any kind of lawful use of force that we're likely to encounter. But you are going to give up some range compared to rifles. But 150 yards, that's a long way. Again, for lawful use of force, and that's all I really care about. I don't care about your unlawful use of force or fantasizing about being an assassin or something, right? I'm talking about lawful use of force to defend life. 150 yards is plenty. 125 yards is a long ways. And inside of that, it's devastating. In most urban environments, it's devastating. Another drawback, you're going to give up capacity, right? Your average AR-15 or AK-47 or, pick your slightly different platform that you love, a SCAR-17, you're talking 20, 30 rounds. For your average fighting shotgun, you're talking 5 to 7 rounds, if you consider rounds the entire cartridge. But here's the thing about a shotgun. You talk about your standard run-of-the-mill Walmart double-aught buck, that's 9 pellets. So you're talking 9 times 7. So if you look at it projectile-wise, you actually have more capacity with the shotgun. If you look at number 4 buck, which is one of my favorite fighting loads, a standard load for that is 21 pellet or 27 pellets. I think it's 27. 27 pellets times 5 or times 7. That's a lot more projectiles even than an AR-15. If you look at a magnum load of number 4 buck is 41 pellets, 41 times 5 or 41 times 7 or 9 or whatever your capacity is, right? That is quite a lot of projectiles. And it's really only a disadvantage if you expect to encounter more than, let's say, 5 to 7 adversaries at one time without having, a fraction of a second to reload, because you can top off a shotgun pretty quick. So it's only really a disadvantage in those, and that's not really a parameter that I'm super concerned about. So I'm not generally concerned about range beyond 150 yards in a fighting encounter, and I'm not generally concerned about having to face more than 7 adversaries in an encounter. So again, the shotgun does pretty well in those parameters. Now again, if we're talking about, when we took Baghdad, it's probably not the gun that I want, but for most stuff that we're going to encounter, CONUS, continental United States, it's a pretty good fighting weapon. But you do give, for everything in the firearms world is a trade-off. You're giving some stuff up, you're gaining quite a bit. Talk about gaining, talk about that power, that ability to put down a threat, an adversary. Mozambique drills are a thing for handguns, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. And I don't care if you're talking about the mighty 45 or the 10 millimeter or whatever, right? Mozambique drills are a thing for a reason. I train them a lot for a reason, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. It's a standard defensive response for a reason, because it generally requires multiple shots and sometimes a headshot to incapacitate with a handgun. For your AR-15, right? Or even an AK, double taps which is kind of a misnomer. We in an actual training, we generally refer to them as a hammered pair or a controlled pair. But controlled pairs are a thing with an assault rifle for a reason, because it may require many rounds with a 5.56 or 7.62 by 39 to take somebody out. Double taps are not a thing with a 12 gauge. You don't really train double taps. You don't really train controlled pairs with a 12 gauge with buckshot, because as long as you hit them in the torso with the full payload, which would be a hit, right? That they're not required. There are several, and yes, we're talking buckshot or slugs for defense. I am not talking about birdshot. Birdshot is a stupid, horrible choice. If you get advice to use birdshot for defense, just stop. But getting back to my point, you can find, accounts of somebody taking several rounds of 357 to the chest. You can find accounts of people taking an entire magazine of 45 to the chest. The Mighty 45, the Mighty 357, and those are both very good pistol rounds and still going. Find me an account of somebody taking a full payload of double-aught buck to the chest and continuing to fight. I don't even know of any. Again, that's not saying those other rounds are bad. They're not bad. They're good. That's why I used them as an example. 12 gauge of buckshot is better. And again, assuming range and assuming you get the full payload on target. But again, controlled pairs, double taps, whatever you want to call them, they're not really a thing with a shotgun because it is a powerhouse. Thus, the fighting shotgun. Now, what is a fighting shotgun? Now, I know I've talked about this kind of stuff before, but this was the winner of a poll. I recently put out a poll of content that you guys wanted on Patreon. If you want to vote in content, go check out Patreon. I try to remember to make those polls open to everybody so you don't have to pay money or anything to vote. You can just tell me what you want to hear. Well, the fighting shotgun was a winner, so I'm going to revisit some of this stuff again. Parameters for a fighting shotgun. 12 gauge or 20 gauge. They're both good. 20 gauge is plenty. It's plenty. The only issue is there's a lot more shotguns, especially if you're talking about bird shotguns and stuff. There's plenty of those in 20 gauge. There are not many. There may be one or two decent fighting shotguns in 20 gauge, but 20 gauge in and of itself is plenty. It's plenty. It's not going to be as versatile. It's not going to be as versatile with fighting loads. But there are still enough available that it's not really a detriment. You are obviously going to generally get a lighter shotgun and lighter ammunition. That's an advantage. But the 12 gauge is a standard. So unless I specify otherwise, when I say a load or something, I'm talking 12 gauge. But since the military, and the police have used 12 gauge for such a long time, it is the standard. Right, it is like the 9mm of the shotgun world. It is pretty ubiquitous, even more so ubiquitous. Like, it is the standard military law enforcement shotgun round. Fighting shotguns are generally in 12 gauge. If I'm being honest, 12 gauge is more than you need, but it is the standard, right? So 12 or 20 gauge, either one of those is sufficient. Again, you're going to have an advantage with the 12 gauge with ammo availability and shotgun availability and all those things and aftermarket support. But either one will work. And you need a reasonable rate of fire. No, a single shot, your survivor shotgun with all your gun adapters, that's not a fighting shotgun. That's not a reasonable rate of fire. It'll do fine with one adversary if you hit him in the first round, but not if you have two or three adversaries, right? You need a reasonable rate of fire for a fighting shotgun. This, yes, I know that they make lever-action shotguns. Even John Moses Browning thought they were a bad idea. I know they make bolt-action shotguns. That was my first gun growing up. It was a great hunting shotgun. But for repeatable firepower, I'm not talking single shots. I'm not talking double guns. I'm not talking lever actions. Those are ridiculous. Just get a proper shotgun. I'm talking pump or semi-auto. They're both good. They both have their advantages and disadvantages. But these are both good and reasonable rate of fire for a fighting shotgun. The semi-auto They can be very reliable, so anybody that says they're not reliable probably doesn't have a quality one. But a major advantage is rate of fire. They're fast, right? And they can be operated pretty good one-handed. If you're strong enough, you can fire them just fine one-handed. So if you're injured, we're talking about fighting situations. If one of your arms is taken out of commission or you're dragging a buddy who's been shot out of a room or something, you can still fire a semi-auto more than once one-handed, right? You can't do that with a pump, at least without taking it out of your shoulder, right? So there's an advantage there. Also, if we're talking gas guns, I actually don't like the gas gun as much for this, but most semi-auto fighting shotguns are going to be gas guns, meaning gas operated. They will take out some of that recoil, which can be pretty punishing, especially in high volume practice. So there is that. Also, as much as people like to say that pumps are more reliable, as far as actual fighting situations and me training people, I'm going to tell you that I think semi-autos are probably more reliable because when people get really stressed out, they can cause a pump gun to malfunction if they don't do a lot of practice with it by not going all the way back, all the way forward, forgetting and then racking another round in, and then forgetting and racking another round in and dropping live rounds on the ground when they only have one or two, they only have 5 rounds to start with or 7 rounds to start with. That's a big deal. So there's that advantage with the semi-auto. Now the pump. The big disadvantage for the semi-auto is to get a good quality one and know the cheap Turkish-made garbage is not a good, reliable fighting shotgun. To get a good, what I would consider good, reliable semi-auto is going to be several times more money. Like a good Benelli or a good Beretta, like a Benelli M Series, M1, M2, M3, M4. Those are a lot of money. They're my preferred semi-auto, or getting a Beretta, 1301. Or something like that. They are several times more money. So if you're on a budget, or even if you're not on a budget, they're going to cost you a lot more money. Money you could spend in training classes and ammunition and things like that. They're also generally a bit more complicated. Now, the pump gun. The pump guns you can get a good, reliable pump gun very affordably. I would have no problem, assuming it had proper sights on it, which can be a struggle. But, as far as reliability, I'd have no problem recommending somebody a Maverick 88. Now, I'm not telling them that's the ultimate fighting shotgun, but I'm saying it's reliable enough to be one. But you can get a lot of really good, affordable pump semi-autos. A Mossberg 500 series, whether it's a 500 or a 590 or a 598-1 or take your pick. Those are fairly affordable guns. The Remington 870 sadly is not being made currently, but you can find a lot of older ones very affordably. Winchesters. There's a lot of really good, affordable, new or old pump guns. Now, a lot of those are not going to be proper fighting guns, but we're talking about pumps and semi-autos. Also, pump guns initially, many of them were designed for like waterfowl hunting, and those are some of the nastiest, harshest conditions on the planet if you've ever done a lot of waterfowl hunting. Just salt water, freezing, ice and snow and wet conditions, and they're made for really punishing environments to start with. So when they're adapted to fighting shotguns, they generally do pretty well as far as reliability goes. Also, they're more flexible generally in the ammunition that they'll use. We talked about flexibility, and I said I'd stick to the fighting aspect. But for fighting stuff, like less lethal rounds, they'll generally work just fine in a pump. They generally won't cycle in a semi-auto. So that's just one example. Things like your rubber buckshot, your rubber baton loads, they even make taser loads. They make all kinds of stuff, signaling rounds, if we're talking about, that kind of application. Generally, a pump gun, there's no reason why a pump gun wouldn't work with those just fine. A semi-auto generally will not. So the pump gun and the semi-auto, either one of those makes a fine fighting shotgun. What do I consider a proper fighting shotgun? One of those actions, one of those gauges, and you need proper sights. If you're just talking about home defense is not a fighting shotgun. That's a home defense shotgun. If you just want a bead for home defense, as long as you have the barrel relatively straight and put the bead in the center of the chest, you're going to hit the target. If you're talking about room distances, if you want to go outside of a room, get a shotgun with proper sights. A bead is a bird hunting shotgun. A bead on the top of a gun is not a fighting shotgun. You want sights. You want iron sights. I don't care if it's a ghost ring. I don't care if it's, your AK style rifle sights like an open sight or an express sight. But the word there is sights, plural, sights, like a front and a rear sight that you align and get a good sight picture like you would aim. It's not a bird shotgun. I love bird shotguns. I love bird hunting. This is not that. This is a fighting shotgun. Could you put double-aught buck in a bird shotgun and kill somebody? Of course you could, but it's not a fighting shotgun. I can kill somebody with a snow shovel. That doesn't make it a fighting shovel, right? The fact that you can do something with it doesn't mean that it's optimal for the task. We're trying to get you a good fighting shotgun here. So a good fighting shotgun needs sights. Now, just like optics are an advantage on a rifle or on a handgun, optics are also an advantage on a shotgun. Both of my go-to fighting shotguns have optics. One has a prism sight, one has a red dot. But yeah, if you want a good red dot on a shotgun, I still think you should have iron sights. You should have backup iron sights on a fighting weapon, whether it's a rifle, buoys, backup iron sights, whether it's my go-to fighting handgun. I have an optic on there, but I also have co-witness backup iron sights. I think on a fighting shotgun, even if you have an optic, you need backup irons. So that's my recommendation. Again, if you don't need an optic on a shotgun, you can fight with irons, just like I went to war fighting with irons, right? So you can fight with iron sights, and they're fine. But just like optics are an advantage on a handgun or a rifle, optics are an advantage on a shotgun. If you want my favorite recommendation for that, it's a Trijicon RMR dual illuminated, meaning tritium and fiber optic. No electronics, no batteries, no nothing. It's rugged and robust just like the shotgun is. But Trijicon RMR dual illuminated, not the one that takes batteries. If you want to use one of those, that's fine. I just don't generally trust my life to things that take batteries. But an optic. So we've got sights, iron sights. We've got an optic. Magazine capacity, I'm not super concerned about because, again, what problem do you have that you're not going to be able to solve with 5 rounds of double-aught buck or 5 slugs? Probably not solving it with more rounds. But if you want to extend that magazine tube at least to the end of the barrel, you're really not losing much. The magazine tube itself is not that heavy. So you're talking about 7 rounds. You're talking about 9 rounds. My 590S, which lets you shoot the short shells. If I'm firing the short shells, it's got a 13-round capacity. But there's nothing wrong with that extended magazine tube. I'm not saying you need it, but if we're building a good fighting shotgun, yeah, extend the magazine tube to the end of the barrel. You're not going to lose much. It's not going to make the gun really any more unwieldy. The magazine tubes are generally aluminum. They don't weigh very much. Why not extend that magazine tube to the end of the barrel? Often overlooked, but you're going to want a good follower. Some of those more affordable pumps we talked about, they may have a cheap plastic follower. You can get a better follower, whether it's an upgraded, thicker plastic or a metal follower. But in the magazine tube, make sure you have a good spring and a good follower. That is often overlooked, and for all the money you're going to spend on the shotgun and the ammo and the training, the magazine tube plug and the spring really are very cheap compared to those, so have a good one. And you're going to want a sling, probably a 2-point sling. Very simple, less complicated. Any of your good AR slings will likely work for this if you want to use like a Magpul sling or something similar. Okay, now you're going to want to equip it. Ammunition, we talked about the magazine tube. You're probably also going to want a side saddle. Even if you don't think you're going to need more rounds, which you probably won't, you may want different rounds, like a slug selector. Like I've got the shotgun loaded with buckshot most of the time, but I want to put a slug in there. You need to train this and practice with this, but you can very quickly on most shotguns take out, like let's say a buckshot round and load a slug. Why? Maybe your target's further away. Maybe you're trying to go through a barrier. Maybe you're trying to, stop a vehicle, whatever the case is. Like you may have a situation where you want a slug. You may be doing a hostage shot, right? Whatever the situation is, you may want a slug in there. And side saddles are good for that. They're also good if you do happen to run out of ammo and you need just one round real quick. You grab it from the side saddle, throw it in the chamber, run the action forward, and you're good to go. It's very quick, quicker than it took me to describe it. So there's that. You got your shotgun set up. Now you're going to need some ammo. The standard is buckshot. Not all buckshot is created equal, and it really depends on the choke you're going to run. Yes, a standard fighting shotgun should have a choke. I think cylinder bore is fine for home defense, but if you're going to do anything outside the home, it's 2026. Interchangeable chokes have been a thing for a long time, for decades. Get a shotgun that takes chokes. You're going to need to figure out what choke works best for you. I generally like improved cylinder for a lot of things. It's generally the most accurate with slugs. It does well with most buckshot, but you have to determine that for yourself. Don't just think because I don't even think I want to give a specific combinations, but just because my shotgun, with my choke will, put all the pellets inside a torso at 25 yards, doesn't mean that yours will, right? You have to test it. But your choke and your ammo selections, buckshot is generally your go-to for fighting, unless you're doing a slug thing that requires a slug. But not all buckshot is created equal. You got your cheap, just like no shot cup, basically just 9 rounds, double up buck poured into a shell. Those can be fine at close distance. Those can be abysmal at intermediate ranges. There's all kinds of buckshot technology. Again, the shotgun is pretty complicated. It's a simple machine, but when you get down to ammunition and stuff, because it's so versatile, there's a lot to it. So be a student of it. Study it. Just a couple, I've done an entire episode on buckshot. You have to go look that up. But just a couple of things. Your standard is double up buck. Your standard is 9 pellet. There's some good 8 pellet loads out there. Either one of those is more than you need. If you want to cluster, your pellets closer together or go to longer ranges, which you can achieve some pretty impressive results. I've had shotguns that would keep all the pellets on a silhouette target at 50 yards with buckshot, depending if you do everything, if you're judicious about your selection of components. But flight control wad is Federal's idea for keeping the pellets together longer, and the Versatite wad from Hornady is pretty much the same thing. So you may mess around with that if you want the pellets to stay closer together. I like number 4 buck. I know that double aught is the standard, but I get a lot more pellets. You're talking about 9 pellets of 33 caliber for double aught buck. You're talking, again, a standard, if we're comparing standard to standard load, 27 pellets of number 4 buck, which I believe is 24 caliber. They're all going to be going about the same velocity. And it's a slightly smaller caliber, but it's still, you get 27 chances to hit something really critical real fast. I like number 4 buck for a lot of stuff. For big game hunting, I've used it successfully. It's one of my go-to for a fighting shotgun. I like number 4 buck. Also, less talked about is number 1 buck, but number 1 buck is also a very good load. It's just hard to find, but number 1 buck is also very good. For slugs, real quick, there's a lot more to this, but basically, don't use Sabo slugs. Sabo slugs are for a rifled shotgun or a shotgun with a rifle choke. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a versatile fighting shotgun. Those are specialty things for big game hunting in areas where they infringe you so bad you can't even use a rifle. But we're talking about, through regular chokes, your 2 main categories of slug are your Foster slug and your Bernanke slug. Foster slugs are your standard, more common American slug. Bernanke slugs are a European thing. If I'm being honest, I think the Bernanke slug's a better design, but Foster slugs are plenty. They're plenty especially for this task, for a fighting shotgun. There are a lot of different variants of a Foster slug, but a basic Foster slug. It's a pretty big hunk of lead. It's got rifling on it. A rifled slug is meant to be shot through a smooth bore shotgun, so just keep that in mind. But, a plain Foster slug, they're generally in a 12 gauge, an ounce. That's pretty standard, but you could get them 7/8 of an ounce. You get them 1 1/4 ounce, an ounce and an eighth, but generally around an ounce, which is a big projectile. Going at, a 1 ounce slug at 1,600 feet a second is not even like a magnum load. It's a standard load. That's a powerhouse. So a Foster slug. And then your Bernanke slugs, they're a little bit more solid. They'll generally penetrate better. If you want like max penetration for whatever reason, the Bernanke slug is where it's at. So you might want to look those up. They're not as common. They're generally pretty pricey, but they're good ammunition for Bernanke slugs. So we got buckshot, we got slugs. Now, the most important part of this equation is your interface with the shotgun. You need to go out and run the shotgun. You could have a shotgun, you could have it all set up, you could have the best shotgun, best ammo, and for whatever reason, you can't hit the target with it. Either you flinch with it, or you don't know how to run the action correctly, or you don't practice with it enough, so you go to pick it up and use it in the real world and you can't remember where the safety is. Like, you have to train with your shotgun, just like anything else, right? The most important part is you interfacing with that shotgun. That shotgun could be the most deadly weapon in the world, but until you can use it properly, it's not an effective tool for anybody. You have to be able to use it properly. So get training with it. Learn how to shoot it effectively, which is different than if you know how to shoot, sporting clays or whatever, that's great. That's fantastic. It's a lot of fun. But learn how to run a fighting shotgun, which means getting training. Learn how to, load that shotgun quickly when you run dry. Learn how to do a slug select drill. Know that your shotgun will keep all the pellets on a target at this distance, but not at that distance. Learn a proper stance and grip on that shotgun so you can run it quickly. And, a 12-gauge shotgun with slugs has some recoil to it. Now, don't let that frighten you off of it, but learn how to control it. Learn how to, master that thing and be the boss of it, and not let it be the boss of you. But, good, proper fighting stance. Likely a more aggressive stance than you're used to with many other, softer recoiling guns, right? But all that stuff, you need training. So get training with it. Yeah, you might get a black and blue shoulder. It happens. Suck it up, buttercup. But get training with the shotgun. Learn both its advantages and its disadvantages, because it has both. And you might just find that you have a love and appreciation for the abilities and capabilities of a fighting shotgun. Hey guys, with that's going to start bringing it in here. If you enjoyed this content, please consider becoming a patron. Again, this episode was done because it was voted on and got the most votes for the Patreon content of what you guys wanted. Again, you don't have to sign up, you don't have to put in a credit card, but go check out Patreon if you want to do that and vote on content. A lot of that stuff, though, is for paid members. If you see something on there that you're like, oh, that seems interesting, well, become a member. It's $5 a month. If you don't have $5 a month and you're trying to save up to get your first shotgun and feed your family, by all means, listen for free to the podcast and don't feel guilty about it. If you just want to be a freeloader and a passive consumer, whatever. But if you want to step up and support the podcast, if you think you get $5 or more a month of value out of the podcast, consider becoming a patron. There's a lot of additional cool content on Patreon. Tactical tip of the day. We talked about buckshot, we talked about slugs, we talked about there's a bunch of different loadings of them. Not a primary consideration, but if you have the option, when you're picking a buckshot and slug load, assuming they shoot well out of your gun, cycle out of your gun, don't jam, perform well on targets, assuming all of that stuff, you may decide you want to get a slug with a different color hull. That's dramatically different color. A lot of law enforcement slugs will have a blue hull. That's kind of handy, right? If your buckshot is red and your slugs are blue. So at a glance, you can tell what's what. So that's just a tactical tip of the day. I like to throw those in there. Your tactical verse of the day. Going to be part of a psalm. Make me walk in the path of your commandments, for I delight in it. Incline my heart to your testimonies, and not to covetousness. Turn away my eyes from looking at worthless things, and revive me in your way. Establish your word to your servant, who is devoted to fearing you. That's so good. I'm going to read a few of those verses again, because it's obviously important to me, but I think society as a whole today. Incline my heart to your testimonies and not to covetousness. Turn away my eyes from looking at worthless things. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.